Today's episode is brought to you by LaRosse Media. They make professional videos to fit any budget, so next time you need a commercial, promo, or corporate video, think LaRosse. Check them out at larossemedia.com. Hello and welcome to the Stinking Albatross Podcast. My name is Alissa Globe and I'm here with Scott Hayward, my co-host and partner in crime. How's it going?
We commit no crimes, just for people out there to know.
I mean, speak for yourself.
Yeah. By the way, happy belated Thanksgiving. How was your guys' Thanksgiving this past weekend?
Oh, it was wonderful. So wonderful. It started at 5:30 in the morning when my son woke up every 20 minutes all night. And I just decided, you know what? Screw sleep. I'll just get up for the day. Made a lemon meringue pie, which actually turned out quite nicely. It was the first time I ever did that. And my mother-in-law's husband requested it. And I think he approved. Anyway, so I spent all day in the kitchen and finally sat down to eat. Table settings already. Put my toddler down, and we were about to say grace, and she just throws up everywhere.
Right on cue.
Yeah, right on cue. My food must have looked pretty bad. That's all I can think of. But and then she cried, so we cleaned her all up, and then everyone was like all settled, and she was in the kitchen, and then round 2 began. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
So whatever she had, did it move its way through your family, or?
Well, then everybody was fine, and then last night I awoke to my husband, and we'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Well, there's a happy Thanksgiving right there.
Oh, the pilgrims would be proud.
Mine was a little bit different. There was a lot less vomit for the most part. My sister actually came to visit us for Thanksgiving for a week, so we showed her all around here, Southern Ontario. We took her to Niagara Falls, Niagara on the Lake. We went to downtown Toronto.
Nice.
We walked around.
Did you go to get Mozza sticks?
Absolutely, we did.
Oh, yeah.
And they're just as delicious as they have ever
I'm
been.
So jelly. I'd be punched in the face 1,000 times over for those Mozza sticks.
Yeah. I did. There was no threats laid on me, but then again, I wasn't doing sidewalk chalk outside. Really dead traffic though, like foot traffic kind of all throughout downtown Toronto still. So we made our way from kind of the east side of downtown. We showed her St. Lawrence Market. We came on Union Station because we came on the go. Made our way up to, where you and I used to live there on Jarvis and Dundas Square. And then we made our way kind of Richmond west towards Spadina because we were going for dim sum in Chinatown because we wanted to give her something that doesn't really exist in Brandon. And along the way, there was a lovely Thanksgiving surprise because I thought it was up at Yonge and Bloor, but apparently no, the location's now along Richmond.
Closer.
Yeah, exactly. Was Chick-fil-A. I saw the sign. I didn't think I saw the sign, but the sign became more real. And I said, we have to stop in here. And she's never had Chick-fil-A before. So there we were. Yeah.
You got those waffle fries or whatever they're called?
Yeah. We just got a little 8-piece, just a little sampler of the Chick-fil-A sauce. So anyways, it was a great Thanksgiving. My uncle, one of my uncles lives in Toronto. He came to visit us on the Sunday because we had Thanksgiving on the Sunday. Went to the early mass. I smoked a turkey, the night before. My sister and I were helping my wife prepare all the dishes that she then ran through the oven. So there was green bean casserole, there was mashed potatoes, there was stuffing. We make our own stuffing with chicken livers and chicken hearts. Yeah, it was great. The food's basically all gone because we're pigs. Like a whole 13.5-pound turkey is now gone. Made great soup, but yeah, it was a great Thanksgiving and no vomit free.
Is Chick-fil-A in Toronto closed on Sundays, or is that only in America?
I would think that's closed on Sundays in Toronto, but I don't know for sure. That's something for producer Dave to look up.
I remember when it first opened in Toronto, people counter-protested it.
Yeah.
It was hilarious.
I think business is just fine for Chick-fil-A.
Yeah. I think that actually helped because the lines were so long and everyone looked at these people like
I remember at the time that Andrew Scheer was leader of the opposition, and I was telling our friends in the office of the leader of the opposition, get Andrew to go to Chick-fil-A and take out Chick-fil-A, because the
Yeah.
people who were going to, and I went when it first opened in Toronto, the people who
Yeah.
were going to Chick-fil-A were a lot of, new people from new Canadian communities that don't
Hmm.
live in the core of Toronto, but live in the suburbs in the 905. I was like, this would be perfect. This would be a
Yeah.
perfect photo op.
Just sits at a table. Oh yeah, producer Dave. All
There we
right,
go.
the tradition continues.
Producer Dave says it's closed on Sundays.
Well, that sounds great. I'm so happy that your sis was able to come. What was her favorite part? Did she like Toronto or Niagara the most, or did she just like everything?
You know what? I'm so self-involved. I'd even ask her what was her favorite or not. We left early this morning to. She had a 10 a.m. flight at Pearson, so of
Mm,
course it's like a 2-hour drive for us, even
yeah.
with the HOV lane. So I had 2 hours to ask her that question, and I needed to even cross my mind. But I think she quite enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
I think she really liked Niagara Falls and Niagara on the Lake.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to put words in her mouth of what was her favorite.
Nice. Well, if anybody's ever in that area, like the Brantford, Niagara area, you guys should check out Ascension Rock Climbing. It's an outdoor rock climbing gym, and my cousin owns it, and it's awesome. So, plug there. Cool. So, lots of things happened in the last week. So, we'll just dive right in. And the first thing is the leader of the UCP was announced on Thursday, and that was Danielle Smith. And a lot of people thought that it was going to be a big blowout, that she might pull a Polyev, first round win, but that didn't in fact happen. It went all the way to 6 rounds, the final ballot, and she barely scraped by. She won with 53% of the vote, with Travis Taves with 46% of the vote, 47%, I guess. Yeah, she's now the Premier of Alberta and has already backtracked on a few things, unsurprisingly. But why don't you give us a little bit of the breakdown of the numbers before we get into that?
Yeah, sure. So I took the liberty to do some calculations, because that is my forte, and that is actually what I enjoy. So I'm not going to go ballot by ballot for every single number, but on the
Mm-hmm.
first ballot, just to give you an idea, this is kind of what you're talking about, Alyssa. A lot of people were wondering, is Danielle Smith going to be close to 50%, above 50%? If she's around 40% or less, it's kind of bad news bears. So
Mm-hmm.
in Alberta, just so people know, for the United Conservative Party of Alberta, it's much like the Saskatchewan Party or the Progressive Conservative Party in Manitoba. They don't do a riding point system like they do federally for the Liberals, federally for the Conservatives, and provincially for the Liberals, which are really more or less Conservatives in BC. It's just one member, one vote right across the province. So on the first ballot, Danielle Smith got 41% of the vote. Travis Taves got 29%. Brian Jean got 11%, who, of course, is a former leader like Danielle Smith of the Wild Rose Party, one of the two predecessors to the UCP. Rebecca Schultz got 7%. Todd Lowen got 8%. Rajan Sani got 2%. And Leila here got a little less than 2%, which was great to see
Mm-hmm.
pro-abortion Leila do so incredibly terribly in the leadership race. Her board, her constituency association board of directors was completely taken over. I think it's like 100% pro-life now, by the pro-life candidate who's running against her in the nomination. So
Yeah, like
um,
why would you sacrifice your seat, your board, and everything for less than 2%? Like that's embarrassing.
yeah, she got 1,394 votes right across the province of Alberta. And
Ugh.
I highly suspect that I would not be surprised, I should say, if her pro life opponent in the nomination race got more votes than that in that riding alone than Leela did right across the
That would be an
province.
epic win.
Well, let's try and make it happen, right? That's what people
Absolutely.
pay for us to do. So anyway, so Leela's vote was redistributed. About a third of it went to Rajan, and the rest was kind of more or less evenly distributed, except only 1% went to Todd and 2% went to Danielle.
Hmm.
Um, then Rajan fell off the ballot. It was about a third, a third, a third each between Travis, Brian, and Rebecca. So you see kind of a trend already beginning that, Danielle Smith and Todd Lowen were in one camp and everyone else seemed
Hmm.
to be in another. And then, shit got real. Then we go to the fourth round, and that's when Todd Lowen dropped off the ballot. So, I think a lot of people thought that Todd's number twos would go to Danielle Smith, and a good number did. Just over 51% of his number twos went to Danielle Smith, 15% to Travis, 17% to Brian, 3% to Rebecca. But it was a smaller percentage than I thought it would be. But at that point in the race, Danielle Smith started at 41% in round one. Then she was 41% in round two, 41% in round three, and then with Todd dropping off, she jumped up to 46%. But Todd was kind of closing the gap a little bit. He was at 31% at that point. Then Rebecca Schultz drops off, and 11% of her vote went to Danielle Smith, 14% to Brian Jean, 60%. 60% of her vote went to Travis Taves. So then Travis jumps up big time from 31% to 36%. Danielle Smith stays at 46%. So then it was going to be, where are Brian Jean's votes going to go?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people thought that like more than half of them would go to Danielle Smith. That wasn't the case. She got, like you said, barely enough, 26% of Brian Jean's number twos. Just under half went to Travis Taves. And this is a big number, almost a third, 28%, just didn't bother to put number two. So I kind of looked at the numbers a little bit further, kind of doing a bit of what if analysis. And of course we have to, operate in the realm of reality and not, make any kind of super crazy assumptions. But if you look at the number of voters in the round one, there was 84,606 members of the party who cast a ballot in the first round. And by this last round, in round 6, when there was only Danielle Smith and Travis Taves left, 78,903 people had cast a ballot. So around, kind of 5,000 to 6,000 dropped off. If every single person who did not put Danielle Smith on their ballot, and there's a reason why they didn't, but decided to put Travis Taves on there, Travis Taves still would have lost the vote, but it would have been 50.14% to 49.86%. Travis Taves would have lost that vote by 240 votes.
But I don't think there's anything that Travis could have done to gain those Brian Jean votes, because those Jean people and the Danielle Smith people were along the same lines, except they both had historical hatred for each other. But they still both hated the Kenney kind of establishment, and I don't think there's anything Travis could have done in this particular leadership race, to be honest.
Well, you have to remember that that 12,203 votes that Brian Jean had on the second last ballot, he has a lot of other people's votes at that point. So he started with 9,300 votes, and then he went to 12,200. So he gained 3,000 votes along the way. So those are 3,000 votes from other people. And it's not just Brian Jean voters that were dropping off between Travis and Danielle. There were, a good chunk of people who had voted for other candidates that had put Brian ahead of those two that dropped off after Brian as well. I think overall, it's incredibly impressive what Travis Taves was able to do. I mean, Danielle Smith is a known political quantity in the province for well over a decade. And she led a very vocal campaign against Jason Kenney to force him out of the leadership, more or less, which barely happened. But I think it's hilarious because she got 53% of the party to behind her, and Jason left because 51% wasn't strong enough for him. So there's a huge chunk of the party that did not vote for Danielle Smith. So she has a mandate, she is the winner, nothing else changed in that regard, but it's not it's not a big win that like Pierre Poilievre had, or even Aaron O'Toole. In that leadership race in 2020 for the federal Conservatives, there were 4 leadership candidates, and on the final ballot, I think Aaron won by a split of 55-45 between him and Peter MacKay. That's a pretty healthy margin. This isn't Andrew Scheer type, but then again, when Andrew Scheer ran, there was, as our friend Josh Gilman likes to say, 1 million people on the ballot. There were 13 candidates on the ballot, so it makes sense that would have been close. For only 6 or 7 candidates on the ballot, this was a lot closer than it should have been. And had this gone on for another couple of weeks, I don't know if Danielle would have won that leadership race.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, especially people in our side of the camp, tend to really hate Jason Kenney, and it shows that less people hate him than the loud population that are constantly, berating him online, and because he did win the referendum and his candidate of choice, like the person who was seen as the Kenny candidate, almost won. So, he isn't as unpopular in the party or in the general province as he's kind of deemed out to be, because it's really unfortunate because the media hates him because he's so conservative, and then the conservatives hate him because of COVID stuff. So we really can't win. But even still, there's enough people within the province and the party that see that he still was an excellent politician. So I do hope that he has a good future ahead. And as he said, when he was handing over the reins, you haven't heard the last of me yet. So we'll see what happens with Kenny. But just a little bit about Danielle Smith. I always like to know a little bit about their backstory. So she was a school board trustee when she joined the Calgary Herald as a columnist with the editorial board, and that was actually she was recruited by Peter Stockland. She said in her
Interesting.
a speech, her victory speech. So Peter Stockland is an excellent social conservative writer, journalist, and then she hosted a show on Global and two talk radio programs. She entered politics in 2009, becoming the leader of the Wild Rose, and became an MLA in 2012, serving as leader of the opposition until 2014. So after losing the provincial election, she was winning in all the polls. She was geared up to win. She lost that election very surprisingly, for many people say a variety of reasons. That's where the whole Lake of Fire situation came into play. People say that she lost because she defended two Wild Rose candidates that were seen as sort of extremists. Others said it was because she kind of flip-flopped on SoCon issues and lost the trust of the social conservatives. There's a lot of different theories as to why she won. Maybe it was all of the above. And then after she lost, she crossed the floor to join the Progressive Conservatives from 2012 to 2015. And this is after saying, there'll be no more floor crossing because previous MLAs had crossed the floor a few months earlier. Me, all the while, talking with Jim Prentice, planning to cross the floor herself. And she did this in attempts to kind of stronghold unity between the Wild Rose and the Progressive Conservatives, which crashed and burned. So then she went to try to win her nomination as a PC candidate in Highwood in 2015, where she lost embarrassingly. So she left politics and she went on to host a talk radio program in Calgary. And she left that last year because she said the Twitter trolls were too much. So she left in a blaze of glory. And then she decided to run in this leadership race, and here we are. So it's been quite a roller coaster for the career of Danielle Smith. A lot of highs and a lot of lows. She was at one point one of the most hated women in the province because of, the backstabbing that she did. So in that regard, just aside from policy itself, I kind of like the fact that she was uncancelable, because I find that too often things are dug up, or even politicians make certain mistakes or they say certain things or whatever, and then they can never get elected again. And I think that's completely idiotic. And it's really interesting that she was able to come back from just she when she went on the talk radio program, she would have open lines and callers from the province could call in, and she just got heckled and insulted constantly, and she responded to that. So in that respect, I have some admiration for her. But on policy side and on conservatism, especially social conservatism, she describes herself as a libertarian. She says she's pro-choice. She said in a recent debate that she thinks biological men should compete in women's sports. And she also, when CTV Edmonton asked where she stood on abortion after Roe v. Wade was overturned, she said that she's so pro-choice, and that includes supporting a person's right to make choices on what to do with their own body, such as medical treatments and vaccines. She said she felt so strongly about this, which is why she announced last week she would amend the Human Rights Act to protect an individual from discrimination for their medical choices or political beliefs. So a lot of people on our side were like, great, we won't get persecuted for being unvaxxed, but she's also lumping that in with the choice to have an abortion, which is something that repeatedly pro-life MLAs and MPs who were supporting Travis were trying to point out to social conservatives, and it fell on deaf ears. I myself had a lot of frustrating conversations with people across the province who should have been voting for the pro-life candidate but didn't because of all the COVID stuff, despite the fact that a lot of the restrictions were already lifted. And at one point I got so frustrated with one of my conversations because the one person was so adamant that we had to vote for Danielle Smith because she will be the one who will never implement restrictions ever again, and she'll take it all the way to the courts, and she'll ensure that this is, written into law. And I said, wow, if pro-lifers acted the same way about abortion as they did with COVID, abortion would be ended already. And then that was the end of the conversation. So it definitely is frustrating. And then we've already seen some of the flip-flops. I mean, she said yesterday that the unvaxxed in Alberta were the most discriminated group she's ever seen. And then today she had to issue a statement saying that she didn't intend to create any false equivalence to the terrible historical discrimination suffered by minorities. And she's committed to learning, addressing the issues, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's just...
It was gobbledygook. It was gobbledygook crap, like take it to your bathroom and use it as toilet paper because it would be just as effective. It really gave a run for the former O'Toole OLO in terms of
it literally was a day.
Yeah, and
1 day.
Yeah, and it's already starting, and saying that the unvaccinated were the most discriminated people that you've ever seen in your lifetime. I mean, it's quite the statement. I would say that I would say that the unvaccinated definitely in this country, the way they were treated for the past 12 months or so, definitely has been up there for sure. Of this is not necessary. It's not a necessary way to treat these people, of which I'm included in that. Right. But at the same time, this is compared to Uyghurs in China, where communist China takes them into literal concentration and death camps, a la 1930s, 1940s Third Reich. There's a difference there. So I'm sure that she meant this is the most discriminated group of people I have seen, in Canada specifically, in my lifetime. And you can argue that one way or the other. And if you're going to make that argument, stick to it, right? Yeah. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with it. I'm not saying I necessarily disagree with it. I haven't really thought a whole lot about specifically that statement. I don't really care so much because the restrictions are gone, and I highly doubt that they're ever going to come back. I think people are way, way, way too... my sister, for example, when she flew here, I asked her how many people on the plane, and there's 150 people on that WestJet flight. How many people on the plane were still wearing masks? Because she flew a few days after the mask mandate was lifted. She said 3.
Yeah.
So people have moved on.
They've already tried to, Western University, they quickly backtracked on a lot of their kind of COVID stuff. And there have been other municipalities that have tried stuff, and the outcry was so insane that they just scrapped it. So, I mean, even Joe Biden in all his crazy glory said that the pandemic is over. So if that guy knows it's over, then I think the rest of us should. But it's frustrating, and especially when these people are coined, like Danielle Smith and Pierre Poilievre are coined as the people who are going to fight back against Trudeau, against the opposition. They're not going to take any guff, and they're going to be the backbone of the party. And then immediately they start apologizing and placating. Who cares what tags you have on your videos, Pierre? Who cares if you shook a hand of somebody you didn't know that belonged to some crap group? You don't have to address this stuff. You don't have to apologize. Move on. Issuing this statement just gives it legs, and it's really frustrating for Conservatives to continue to make the same mistakes when we think that we're electing politicians who know better and who say that they know better, but in the end, their actions say differently.
Another big one in terms of policy, Barry, because that was just a statement that she made, and again, you can make certain arguments one way or the other. I think that, if you're going to make a statement like that, you need to be prepared for the inevitable backlash. You're purposely making that statement to make a big splash, and if that's your whole purpose, then you have to go in defending it. And she folded like a cheap set of cards right away. And another one that was another clarification was on her Sovereignty Act that would grant Alberta a lot of powers that may or may not exist under the British North America Act, between sections 91 and 92, between what powers the federal crown has versus the provincial crown. There are a lot of legitimate questions there, but basically she said, it was indicated during the leadership race that she's going to push a bunch of stuff forward, and if the federal government doesn't like it, too bad, so sad. This is what we're going with. And then hours after she won the leadership race, she clarified, saying oh no, whatever the Supreme Court of Canada says, we'll go with. Well, the Supreme Court of Canada has already ruled that the federal carbon tax as imposed upon provinces is perfectly fine. The Supreme Court of Canada has ruled, sometimes in favor of pipelines, oftentimes not in favor of pipelines, because of the different restrictions that the Liberal government has put in place. And of course, it makes sense because the court was, the 9 justices of the Supreme Court of
Mm-hmm.
Canada were appointed either by Justin Trudeau, so hardcore liberals, or
Mm-hmm.
by Stephen Harper, so hardcore liberals again. And but it's really important who we elect
Yeah.
as leader for this type
Yeah.
of stuff, because it really matters. Anyway, point being is that no, 2 flip-flops in basically
Yeah.
2 days. It's quite the start for Danielle Smith. So, let's see what she's able to do as premier and as leader of that caucus.
And pro-lifers are really frustrating too, to a certain extent, because in some of my conversations, people were like, well, Travis isn't that pro-life. So they said, I don't like voting for somebody who's personally pro-life, but professionally pro-choice, which wasn't even true because Travis had pro-life policies. And so my response to that is, so you rather vote for someone who's personally pro-choice and professionally pro-choice? Like, make it make sense. It's really very frustrating. And I hope that in the future, if we want to actually start making waves with regards to abortion legislation, even small pieces of policy or justices or whatever the case may be, we have to stop giving away our vote to non-pro-life leaders. Like, enough is enough already.
Well, that's a good question. That's a legitimate question. Like, is that what people want? Is that what pro-lifers want? Because I hear a lot of people bitch and wail about how great is it that in the United States they overturned Roe v. Wade with the Dobbs decision. Why can't we do something like that here? Well, the reason why we can't do something like that here is because you don't show up to nomination meetings. You don't show up to leadership races. You don't show up to board meetings for the different electoral districts associations and party riding boards of directors. You don't show up to party policy conventions to push this stuff forward. And when you do, you get, bedazzled by a once in a 100-year issue that has already been more or less settled, including by liberal governments, including the federal liberal government. So what are we doing here?
And then people say, well, I wish that our pro-life MPs were stronger and they would be more outspoken. And my response to that is, if you want pro-life MPs to be stronger, then actually vote for them. Because if you don't vote for them, then they don't have, why would they stick their neck out on the line for an issue that they know that even pro-lifers don't support them on, number one. And number two, why would they stick their neck out on the line legislatively if they know that their bills are continuously going to fail because they don't have a majority? So the only way that these pro-life MPs are going to be louder and stronger and more effective is if pro-lifers actually vote for them. But if we continue to vote for non-pro-life leaders or MPs or whatever, this is what we're going to get. So
yeah, and I'm all for keeping pro-life politicians accountable, holding them to account.
100%.
And that's why we keep track of, what their voting record is in the House of Commons, what their voting record is in the legislative assemblies. That's why we try to get pro-lifers in as staffers. That's something we continuously try to do. That's why we try to work with the staffers that work for those pro-life members of parliament, not all of whom, by the way, are pro-life, being, the staffers that work for these pro-life politicians. There's a lot of work that goes into it, a lot of work, frankly, for just 2 people, which is something maybe we could talk about at a different time, about trying to expand our organization so we can actually be very competitive from the pro-life perspective. But all that being said, we often get asked by pro-lifers, well, where are the 20 door knockers for my campaign to get reelected? If you take a federal riding, which often has about 100,000 people on average, sometimes a little bit higher in places like Alberta and Ontario and British Columbia, surely you can find 20 people who are 100% pro-life to go out, knock on doors one night a week for a 6-week campaign. And it's difficult, and it shouldn't be difficult. And because it's difficult, we don't win, and we don't get our stuff put forward. Like you said, Alissa, if even like a centella, even if like 10% of the effort that I have seen pro-lifers put into making sure that COVID restrictions are gone, which again, I agree with, that they put in to make sure that restrictions are put in place to protect both women and their preborn children, then the abortion rate would be far, far lower in this country and a lot quicker. So anyone who's watching this who, maybe you feel a little bit attacked, question that. Look into your conscience. Guilt is a sign of a well-formed conscience, and you need to really ask yourselves, what are you actually doing to push this issue forward politically? Because if it does matter to you, and you do consider yourself pro-life, and it is your number 1 or number 2 issue, and it should be your number 1 issue, then you should be voting and acting accordingly politically. And when you don't get mad at us that there's no, and don't get mad at people like Andrew Scheer or Jason Kenney or whomever that, pro-life legislation is going to go forward, you are very much part of the problem, maybe even more so if you're
And
not voting this
I
way.
highly doubt that a lot of the people that are listening to this podcast fall into that boat, just because I think they're
Yeah.
the most hardcore of the hardcores. But I think that a lot of people that listen to this podcast have influence over other pro-life organizations and groups within their communities, and this is a strong message that we need to communicate effectively. And so yeah, if we want to start winning, if we want to start actually, and by winning I mean passing legislation, we're winning nominations and elections, but we need to actually start passing legislation. This is what we need to do, and we can't get sidetracked with any like issue of the week. So, long rant sidetrack over.
For now.
For now. Well, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk about another serious topic that has broached the Canadian public this week, and that is the unfortunate topic of assisted suicide for infants. Stay tuned.
We live in a world that grows through communication.
Every connection comes from a dream to be heard and realized.
To welcome a better future. What are your dreams?
LaRosse Media will help communicate your vision through our professional video production services and marketing strategies.
Start building connections to your future audience. Visit larosmedia.com.
And be sure to check out our extended service options.
Dream, produce, market, succeed with LaRosse Media.
Serving Canada from coast to coast to coast.
And we're back. Now, you may have seen a video circulating throughout the last week of Dr. Louis Roy from the Quebec College of Physicians, who gave a testimony to the House of Commons Special Joint Committee of Medical Assistance in Dying last Friday. And he said that his organization believes assisted suicide can be approved for infants up to age 1 who are born with severe malformations and grave and severe syndromes. So, when we were discussing physician-assisted suicide, aka medical assistance in dying, MAID, in the House of Commons and even within the Supreme Court, the slippery slope argument was continuously made by opponents of MAID. And they were laughed at, they were mocked, they were ridiculed, and now they are actually becoming reality. Because the number one slippery slope was that they were going to attack infants and children who could not consent, and that's what they're actually doing. And so there was an amazing article in the National Post that talked about this, and one of the best quotes was by a woman from Inclusion Canada.
Mm-hmm.
She was the executive vice president, and she said that most families of children with disabilities are told from the start that their child will, in one way or another, not have a good quality of life, and that predictions are far too often based on discriminatory assumptions about life with a disability. And then she also said that the problem is also with a lack of consent. An infant cannot consent to their own death. It's not MAID, it's murder. And providing MAID to a person who cannot consent is a standard that is wildly dangerous for all persons with intellectual disabilities in Canada. What struck me about this quote was like, apply that exact same logic to the preborn child. Like, they're talking about an infant under the age of 1. Well, apply that exact same logic to a child 2 months earlier that's in the womb, that's being targeted for whatever reason, whether it's a disability or a health issue or because of their gender or whatever the case may be. And that same principle still applies. So I'm glad that these quotes are being out there, especially despite the fact that it's such a serious and horrifying issue, but it sheds light on the humanity of a child, and it also sheds light on the fact that disability does not justify killing somebody, especially a child or an adult. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say one of the things I was struck by the article that Catherine Levesque from the National Post put together here was that you have people. Obviously, people from the pro-life movement speaking out. So you have Alex Schandenberg, who runs Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, but you also have people from that may or may not be pro-life, but are taking a pro-life view specifically on
Yes.
this issue from outside of the pro-life community, at least from an organization that's neither pro-life or pro-abortion, or pro-life or pro-assisted suicide. I guess now these organizations would be against assisted suicide. So especially from the disability community, which is really, really great to see. Now, one thing I want to kind of bring back politically is that you have to remember that the way that assisted suicide came about in Canada was through the Carter decision that the Supreme Court ruled on in December of 2014 that struck down that provision in the Criminal Code of Canada. And they basically said, Parliament, you have 6 months to come up with a new legislation. Otherwise, if you don't come up with new legislation to govern what is now called medical assistance in dying, or physician-assisted suicide, then these provisions will go forward. And so the Liberal government at the time, because they had won the election in 2015, the Harper government had refused to respond to the Supreme Court. They came up with legislation that was actually stronger than what the Supreme Court had recommended, and had many guardrails, if you will, in it. Now,
Right.
I still, obviously, we would disagree with, the whole premise of the legislation and the premise of the decision. I still think that the Harper government should have invoked Section 33 of the Constitution Act, which is the notwithstanding clause, which basically says, hey, that's great, but we as Parliament are ignoring this decision because it's dumb. By the way, Supreme Courts around the world have made dumb decisions within the last 150 years, and this would be one amongst many. And we're going to continue on, or we're going to pass our own legislation or something like that to make sure that we protect very vulnerable people. And now it is attacking vulnerable people. It's attacking, we can see it creeping in for infants. We can see it creeping in. Also, I don't know if you mentioned this, Alissa, but the physician from that Quebec college, their college is also recommending that MAID, medical assistance in dying, physicians assisted suicide, be offered to all minors between the ages of 13 and 17, or 14 and 17, one of the two, as well as for, death that isn't necessarily foreseeable. And as he put it, a tired life, like you're just kind of sick of living or whatever. And at the same time, you had mental health awareness days last week, and people bringing up, especially Indigenous Canadians, that like, hey, we really need to keep fighting youth suicides in our communities, particularly in the north and the northern reserves. And at the same time, you have a government that's, I don't know if they're necessarily going to agree with the Quebec physicians or not, but or at least entertaining, like, hey, let's make a suicide legal and ran by the government, and not for like the most young of the youth. The cognitive dissonance is just like absolutely astounding on this.
What do you think would have happened if Harper had won instead of Trudeau? Do you think he continuously would have ignored the Supreme Court ruling? And if so, what would have happened? Like, let's play this out.
You could not have ignored the ruling, because the court said that in lieu of you passing any legislation, this is the regime that would be put in place. So it's a little bit like Morgentaler, because Morgentaler struck down the 1969 abortion law passed by Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and they had recommendations of what a new abortion law could look like that varied amongst the 7 justices that rendered decisions in that case, but they didn't, as a court, say together, this is the provision we're putting in place. So
okay, so if they hadn't passed any laws, it would have been like a complete black hole. So what about the notwithstanding clause? What would that have done then?
It basically stays the decision. So it overrules the decision for a period of 5 years, and then you have to renew it every 5 years. Or
do you think Harper would have had the balls to do that?
I don't know. I don't know the man. I'm not going to pretend I know the man. He didn't, I understand it was an election year or whatever, but he didn't do anything about it. He was the one who appointed those justices. By the way, the Carter decision was 9-0. Meaning that it was unanimous, all 9 justices agreed, and all 9 justices wrote one decision. So, for example, in Morgentaler, you had 5 justices that agreed with the striking down of that provision for abortion in the Criminal Code of Canada that Pierre Elliott Trudeau had put in place, and 2 justices that disagreed with the strike down. But amongst the 5 justices, you had 3 different written decisions, because they were saying we were we're suggesting that this be struck down for different reasons and we can't agree. So at least back then, in the late 80s, you had somewhat of a variety of opinion on a court, which I think is very important to have. And then in the Sue Rodriguez decision in 1993, which is basically the exact same decision as Carter in 2014, it was I believe it was a 9-0 decision against keeping. So within the course of not even a generation, the court, 20 years later completely changed, which is kind of hopeful to say like a future court can do that. And it shows the importance of making sure that pro-lifers are appointed to these positions. And the way you get pro-lifers appointed to these positions is by electing pro-lifers.
Leadership.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, your country is in big trouble when there's not one dissenting opinion on such a contentious topic. Like, that's just insane when you really think about it.
Now, sorry, one thing to be fair to Harper, there are 2 justices now on the court that got appointed after that decision was rendered, and I think both of those justices would have dissented, and they might have brought along maybe one other because they're both very, very convincing, that being Cote and Brown. So I guess, to balance it out for Harper, maybe he would have done something about it. But I mean, of those 9 justices that ruled in that Carter decision, I think he appointed like 6. It was a majority.
Yeah.
5 or 6.
Thanks, Harper. All right. Well, we'll take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll talk about Poilievre's shadow cabinet announced just today. So stay tuned.
Nature communicates with us in a universal language. The sunrise starts a new day. The sunset marks our accomplishments.
The most beautiful communication is where the speaker and the listener match perfectly and understand the same message.
Your future audience is waiting to hear from you. What message do you need to share?
At LaRosse Media, we fashion beautiful communications through our professional video production services and marketing strategies.
Create your own most beautiful message. Visit larosmedia.com and be sure to check out our extended service options.
Dream, produce, market, succeed with LaRosse Media.
Serving Canada from coast to coast to coast.
And we're back. Now, we're filming this podcast on Wednesday. So today, earlier, Poilievre announced his shadow cabinet. He called it his inflation-busting shadow cabinet of 51 critics and 20 associate critics. And of honorable mention, Leslyn Lewis is the critic for infrastructure and communities. Scott Aitchison was named critic for housing and diversity and inclusion. And there were a whole crap load of social conservatives that were also appointed as critics as well. So, I mean, overall, to me, at first glance, the shadow cabinet looks promising. Also, Gerard Deltel, who supported Charest, is the critic for environment and climate change. So it shows that not only the people who supported Poilievre were appointed in the shadow cabinet, but also some of the people who didn't support him, which I think is important. I don't think that Aaron O'Toole was very good at incorporating his adversaries, which is why he was ousted. But I don't know, Scott, what do you think about the shadow cabinet?
Well, first off, I think it's hilarious that it's called inflation busting because, like you mentioned, Alissa, if you include if you include the House team as well, right? So a shadow cabinet is, basically, as I suggest, it's kind of your version of what the cabinet would be if you're in official opposition. And in addition to that, you have your House leadership team. So obviously the leader of the party, your leader in the House, your question period coordinator, all that type of stuff. So when you include all those people together, you're talking 80. You're talking 80 people, which is basically, it's over 2/3 of the caucus. And compared to the Liberals have a cabinet and a House leadership team of 43. That includes every minister, every associate minister, whatever, because these critic positions for Pierre Poilievre don't include deputy critic roles if he does have any deputy shadow ministers, which he may or may not. So it's hilarious that you call it inflation busting, because if you went into a government and you had a cabinet of 80 people, which for kind of context, I think the United Kingdom has a cabinet of maybe 40, a country that's twice as large as us in terms of population. That's a great way to contribute to inflation. So I kind of looked up, what is the breakdown within the shadow cabinet, and this doesn't necessarily tell exactly everything where things are going to go or not go, but I think it's just interesting. So there are 45 pro-lifers that have a 100% pro-life voting record in the shadow cabinet, so that's 56% of the shadow cabinet. There are 25 who are pro-abortion, so that's 31% of the shadow cabinet, and there are 10 that we don't know, and that's 13%. Probably a good chunk of those 10 will end up being pro-life. So you're looking at about maybe 2/3 of the shadow cabinet being pro-life, which is kind of reflective of caucus, because roughly 2/3 of the Conservative caucus is pro-life. Of the shadow cabinet and House leadership team members, and then of course this doesn't include the actual leadership candidates themselves, 44 had backed Pierre Poilievre in the leadership race, so that's 55% of the shadow cabinet. So if you were a member of parliament who had backed Pierre for the leadership race, 71% of them are in the shadow cabinet, so a very high percentage. 10 members of shadow cabinet back Charest, so that's 13% of shadow cabinet overall. That's 63% of MPs who have backed Charest are in the shadow cabinet. There are 3 MPs who are in the shadow cabinet that backed Leslyn Lewis. That's 4% of the shadow cabinet, and that's 30% of the MPs that supported Leslyn Lewis are in the shadow cabinet. So I think it's interesting because the predecessor for the shadow minister of infrastructure and communities is none other than Andrew Scheer. So I don't think that's
coincidental.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's hilarious that Scott Aitchison, the white bag of flour, like the kind of no-name MP as Josh kind of described him. Like if there are a lineup of white male MPs from Ontario, from rural Ontario, he would be able to pick them out, and I think very few Canadians would. Is the shadow minister for diversity and inclusion?
It's kind of like Poilievre's making fun of him.
Maybe
Like it's sort of a joke.
Yeah. But I think so much for who is included in shadow cabinet. I think there's also some notable exclusions.
Yes, there are.
That would be Michelle Rumpel-Garner, who has no position in Pierre Poilievre's leadership shadow cabinet. Ed Fast, who was very harsh toward Pierre both during and after the leadership race, of course, is not included in the shadow cabinet, and a few other, literally a few other MPs, like less than a third after that. But I think those are a couple of really big names that are not included in the shadow cabinet, and definitely indicate. I think that's more indicative than kind of who's in. I think it's more indicative of who's out, given how inflation bustingly large the shadow cabinet is.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad that Leslyn's in, and I know she's going to do an amazing job. And so thank you, Poilievre, for that. And we'll see what happens. Hopefully onward to a victory in the next election. So no response. Okay.
I can't say it.
Alrighty. Okay. And on that note, we're going to end our podcast with weird facts about Canadian Thanksgiving.
Why don't you lead us off, Alissa, since this one was your idea?
Okay, so my fact is about turkeys.
Oh boy, we might have the same fact here.
Really?
Yeah. Go ahead.
About eating turkeys or about the number of turkeys? Because I have two different ones.
Go ahead.
Okay, so mine is a twofold. Basically, turkey consumption could cause tiredness due to its tryptophan, a naturally occurring amino acid used by the human body to create serotonin, which promotes slow wave sleep. So that's why people unbuckle their belts, stick out their bellies, and go to sleep after Thanksgiving dinner.
It's glorious. It's absolutely glorious.
Another interesting fact, 20.2 million turkeys are sold annually in Canada, according to Stats Can. The data is from 2018. A little over $390 million are the annual revenues made by farms that grow turkeys. So if you're wondering what to do with your life, anyone who's listening to this, maybe just go into turkey farming and you can potentially become a millionaire.
So I have a couple of facts here. 45% of all whole turkeys that are consumed in Canada are consumed on Thanksgiving weekend. and it's another 35% for Christmas. So, 2 days of the year right there account for, well over half of turkey sales in Canada. And a lot of people might not realize this, but Thanksgiving actually started in Canada in the United States. It's old. It's quite a bit older than the United States. So it's probably somewhat tied to Ember Days, which is a Catholic liturgical thing. But Protestants began kind of doing something similar, particularly in England, after the Protestant Reformation took hold in England, and they had these harvest festivals, these festivals of Thanksgiving that they would have within their religious communities. And so it was brought to Canada. It was brought to Canada very early on by Martin Frobisher in 1579, had a Thanksgiving service in what is now Frobisher Bay. So that's all the way up in Nunavut, for those of you who don't know your Canadian geography. And then kind of on a continuously basis, when Samuel de Champlain arrived in Quebec, they had a massive Thanksgiving and a Thanksgiving feast in 1604. And ever since then in Canada, the days might differ in the different areas and whatnot. We've always had a Thanksgiving Day in the autumn in Canada. The earliest recorded Thanksgiving in the United States was 1607. Of course, the famous one is at Plymouth Rock with the Pilgrims in 1621. But it took a hold in the United States much, much later than it did in Canada. So, Canadian Thanksgiving, originally Canadian, adopted by American cousins, which is great, but fun little factoid there.
Yeah, and I also was reading that like cranberries, the reason why we have cranberries is because Indigenous people use them for healing, and they kind of adopted them into, because it started in Nunavut, so that's kind of why they included cranberries, and they had turkeys because it was a cheap, easy way to feed a lot of people.
They had turkeys in Nunavut?
No, they had just, that's why you have a turkey. I don't know if they probably don't have turkeys in Nunavut. I don't know, just scratch that part out. But there was something about cranberries and healing. Did you not read that?
No, I didn't, but that's great because I eat a lot of cranberry sauce. My wife makes her own cranberry sauce, which is absolutely fantastic. And so I'm all healed up.
Maybe your body, but not your brain.
Thank you for that.
What are you grateful for, Scott?
You. And your jokes and your banter and no, I'm grateful for my family for sure. This was the first Thanksgiving here. Well, okay, you and I have traveled across the country.
I know. I was gonna say
yeah. Go ahead.
We are the Thanksgiving. We've spent so many Thanksgivings together. I think it was like 6 straight years of Thanksgivings
something like
together.
That. Yeah.
All over the country.
But usually with each other's families.
Yeah. But sometimes with the whales.
Yeah.
And sharks.
One time we were in Nova Scotia. I think it was 2018. Yeah. And we were there for Thanksgiving, which was really sad because both your family and my family do Thanksgiving big time. Mm-hmm. And which is one thing I didn't really realize. I don't know if it's an Ontario thing or maybe my family's just weird, but your family, I think most families in Canada celebrate the Thanksgiving on the Sunday, not the Monday.
Yeah.
But your family started eating Thanksgiving dinner at like 2 or 3 in the afternoon. We wait till like 6 or 7.
Oh.
Yeah. So that's I'm down with that.
I have adopted that because I don't like eating late. It just makes me you feel sick, and I like to have drinks and dessert. You want to wait a little while to have dessert, and so I've adopted that. We ate at 4, I think, or close to 4.
Yeah, we were originally supposed to be 4. It ended up being 5. I wanted to give the turkey another hour of smoke, but out of curiosity, I don't know what the whole rest of the podcast to be this, but it just might be. Would you have for? Oh, you had the lemon meringue for dessert. Sorry.
Oh, we had so many desserts. Okay, so I made a lemon meringue. I made a chocolate cheesecake with white chocolate, milk chocolate, and semi-sweet chocolate.
Okay.
It sounds like a lot of chocolate, but it actually isn't, and it's really delicious.
It's literally multiple types of chocolate.
Yes. We broke out apple pie and cherry pie that we had saved from Christmas, which was still really good, and pecan tarts, like butter tarts.
Yep.
And my husband loves pumpkin pie, and I told him repeatedly that I would make it, but he said I was making too much, so he bought it, and it was disgusting.
No, don't do it. You can't.
Yeah.
We're in the Niagara, so we're surrounded by fruit. So we went apple picking, and we used those apples for the apple pie. I picked up a few different pumpkins, and my wife made her own pumpkin puree.
Amazing.
Yeah. And so we had pumpkin pie, we had apple pie, and she did I forget what it's called, but like, when you have the dough that crosses over on top, like the checkered.
Yeah.
She did that.
Yeah.
So we got to have even more
Very
apples
cool.
in it. Yeah. And
Just stuffed it.
and the best by far was the pecan pie. And we were able to find it. I searched all over. Salt flakes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, to put it
That
on top.
sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, now it's time to work all that food off. I went for like multiple walks and a run yesterday, so.
Yeah, I've had 2
Trying to
days in a
get
row of
started.
running, both days over 20 degrees, and I don't think we're going to see that again for the rest of the
No.
year. So, got to take advantage of it.
Absolutely.
It's a sign from God. Get my fat ass out of there and hit the road. Use that turkey.
Also, tonight was the first Leafs game, home opener. Anybody know what happened?
Who are they playing?
I don't even know. Producer Dave,
Terrible Leafs fan.
give us the Leafs score before we leave. Before we leave.
Oh, Montreal won 4-3.
Oh, what the...
Yeah. So I know some people were saying, usually Toronto-based people, that the Leafs were favored to be the President's Trophy winner this year, but yeah, I don't know. Anyway.
Rip. All right. Thanks for joining us for this podcast. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube, Rumble, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, basically anywhere you listen to podcasts. Make sure you subscribe so you're alerted every Friday when our new podcast comes out. Leave us a comment or a question in the comment section on any of those websites. Send us an email, info@itstartsrightnow.ca. We'd love to hear from you. Hate mail, love mail, whatever the case may be. You write it, we'll read it. Thank you for joining us this week, and we'll see you next week.
Bye for now.